Søren Kierkegaard. How can an individual achieve authentic existence through faith? Søren Kierkegaard, born in Copenhagen in 1813, lived a short but intellectually explosive life that laid the groundwork for modern existentialism. Raised in a strict religious household, he was deeply influenced by his father's melancholic piety and a profound sense of inherited guilt, an atmosphere that would later permeate his entire philosophical inquiry. Though he studied theology at the University of Copenhagen, he soon found himself at odds with the abstract systems of his time, particularly Hegelianism, which he felt erased the individual. A broken engagement to Regine Olsen became a pivotal crisis, fueling a prolific writing career as he wrestled with themes of sacrifice, love, and ethical duty. Writing under various pseudonyms, Kierkegaard explored conflicting viewpoints without settling on a single dogmatic truth. His major works, such as either / or In Fear and Trembling, challenge readers to confront the weight of personal choice. In an era that prized objective certainty, Kierkegaard championed the subjective inner life, insisting that truth is not something to be known distantly, but something to be lived passionately. Subjectivity is truth. Kierkegaard confronted a philosophical landscape dominated by objective systems that sought to explain all of existence through logic. He argued that such systems, while impressive, failed to address the concrete reality of the living human being. For an individual facing the critical questions of how to live and what to believe, objective facts offer little guidance. His crucial insight was that ethical and religious truths are not objects of scientific observation, they are realities that must be appropriated inwardly. To say that subjectivity is truth is not to deny objective reality, but to assert that the most significant truths are those that matter to the subject personally and passionately. One can know every doctrine of a faith or rule of ethics, yet if these do not transform the inner life, they remain untruths for that individual. This shift moved philosophy away from abstract speculation toward the intense, and often agonizing, responsibility of the self. The leap of faith. Rationality often seeks to build bridges between the known and the unknown, attempting to prove religious truths through logic. However, this reliance on reason hits a wall when faced with the absolute paradox of the divine. A genuine relationship with the divine requires a movement that logic cannot justify, a qualitative transition where the individual abandons the safety of probability. This movement is not a gradual slide but a decisive leap across the abyss of uncertainty. By emphasizing this breach with reason, Kierkegaard highlights that faith is not a form of knowledge but a state of being that exists only in the tension of the absurd. The individual must hold fast to their conviction precisely because it cannot be rationally demonstrated, making faith a feat of passion rather than the conclusion of an argument. The three stages of existence. Kierkegaard viewed human life as a journey of becoming, evolving through distinct modes of existence. Initially, one may live in the aesthetic sphere, governed by the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of boredom. Here, life is a series of fleeting moments lacking continuity. This often leads to despair as the self realizes the emptiness of fleeing from responsibility. This crisis can propel the individual into the ethical sphere, where life is structured by duty, universal rules, and enduring commitments. While the ethical life provides stability, it may fail to account for the unique, exceptional predicament of the individual before God. The final movement is toward the religious sphere, where the self stands alone before the divine, transcending universal ethics in favor of a personal, often paradoxical, relationship with the absolute. This progression is not automatic, it requires a conscious act of will at every turn. Kierkegaard's insistence on the primacy of the individual remained largely dormant until the 20th century, when it ignited the existentialist movement. His critique of mass society and systematic philosophy profoundly influenced thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Martin Heidegger, who adopted his analysis of angst and the burden of freedom. Theologians such as Karl Barth and Paul Tillich drew heavily on his concept of the qualitative difference between God and humanity. Beyond academia, his exploration of the leap and the subjective nature of truth continues to resonate in psychology and literature, prefiguring the modern search for meaning in a secular world. By dismantling the comfort of objective systems, Kierkegaard forced subsequent generations to confront the solitude of the human condition. Friedrich Nietzsche. How can we overcome nihilism to create our own meaning? Friedrich Nietzsche, born in 1844 in Prussia, became the youngest ever professor of classical philology at the University of Basel at just 24. However, chronic ill health soon forced him into a nomadic life of writing and isolation. The son of a Lutheran pastor who died young, Nietzsche was raised in a pious, female-dominated household, a background he would fiercely react against in his mature philosophy. His intellectual journey began with a deep admiration for Schopenhauer and Wagner, though he eventually broke with both to forge his own path. Plagued by migraines and failing eyesight, he spent his most productive years wandering through Switzerland, France, and Italy, composing aphoristic masterpieces like Thus Spoke Zarathustra and Beyond Good and Evil. He sought to diagnose the cultural sickness of Europe, which he saw as decaying under the weight of nihilism. His mental collapse in 1889 effectively ended his conscious life, leaving his legacy to be debated and occasionally misappropriated for decades to come. Will to power. In observing the natural world and human history, Nietzsche argued that the primary drive of living things was not merely survival, but expansion, growth, and self-overcoming. Traditional views often saw life as a struggle for existence, but Nietzsche felt this failed to account for the creative impulses that drive organisms to transcend their own limits. This will to power is an active force that seeks to assert strength and interpret the world according to its own perspective. It suggests that all truth and value are expressions of this underlying drive, created by the strong to bring order to the chaos of existence. By reframing life as a ceaseless striving for self-mastery, the comfort of static objective truths is removed. Instead, reality is revealed as a dynamic interplay of forces where meaning is not discovered but created, challenging individuals to transform their suffering into a higher form of vitality. Eternal recurrence. The weight of our actions is often diminished by a linear view of time, where the past is left behind. To counter this, Nietzsche proposed a terrifying yet liberating thought experiment. Imagine that this life, exactly as you live it now, must be repeated countless times, with every joy and every pain returning in the same sequence. This prospect forces a confrontation with the value of one's existence. If the idea causes despair, it reveals a resentment toward life. If it is welcomed, it indicates a supreme affirmation of the present. This concept serves as the ultimate test of life affirmation, demanding that one live in such a way that they would wish to repeat it for eternity. It strips away the hope for a different future or afterlife, grounding meaning entirely in the here and now. The challenge is amor fati, to love one's fate so completely that even the necessity of things becomes beautiful. Übermensch, Overman. With the decline of traditional religious values, a state Nietzsche called the death of God, humanity faced a crisis of meaning. The danger was a slide into passive nihilism, the era of the last man who seeks only comfort. Against this stagnation stands the ideal of the Übermensch, or Overman. This figure is not a biological evolution but a spiritual goal, representing someone who has overcome the limitations of conventional morality to create their own values. The Übermensch represents the meaning of the earth, staying faithful to the physical world rather than otherworldly hopes. This ideal requires the destruction of old tablets of morality that suppress life's instincts, replacing them with a new, life-affirming ethos. It is a call for radical self-overcoming, inviting the individual to become the poet and architect of their own life in a godless universe. Nietzsche's anatomy of morality fundamentally altered the course of 20th century thought, setting the stage for existentialism, post-structuralism, and postmodernism. Figures like Foucault, Derrida, and Deleuze drew heavily on his critiques of power and language. While his ideas were tragically misappropriated by fascist ideologies in the mid-20th century, later scholarship restored his reputation as a champion of individual radicalism and a critic of nationalism. In psychology, Freud and Jung acknowledged his profound insights into the subconscious and the drives underlying human behavior. From literature to popular culture, Nietzsche remains the great disruptor, constantly forcing us to question the value of our values. Edmund Husserl. How do we return to the things themselves in experience? Edmund Husserl, born in 1859 in the Austrian Empire, began his career as a mathematician before shifting to philosophy, driven by a desire to place it on the firm footing of a rigorous science. He studied under Franz Brentano, whose psychology shaped his early thinking on the mind. As a Jewish professor in Germany during the rise of Nazism, Husserl faced increasing persecution, eventually being barred from the university library under the regime's racial laws. Despite these hardships, he remained dedicated to phenomenology, a method he believed could rescue European culture from skepticism and irrationalism. His major works, such as Logical Investigations and Ideas, reflect an uncompromising commitment to precision. Husserl sought to suspend all assumptions about the external world to describe experience exactly as it presents itself to consciousness. He is celebrated as the father of phenomenology, a movement that would spawn the most important philosophical developments of the 20th century. Intentionality. In analyzing the mind, Husserl realized that consciousness is not a self-contained box, but is always directed toward something. To think is to think of something, to fear is to fear something. This structural feature, known as intentionality, means that the mind and the world are strictly correlated. One cannot understand the subject without the object it perceives, nor the object without the subject that perceives it. This insight broke with traditions that viewed the mind as either a passive mirror or a separate substance. Instead, it revealed consciousness as an active engagement that constitutes the meaning of objects. By focusing on this directedness, philosophy could move away from debates about whether the world is real and focus instead on how the world appears to us. It shifted the ground of inquiry to the structures of experience itself. Epoche, phenomenological reduction. In daily life, we operate in a natural attitude, taking the existence of the world for granted. While practical, this assumption loads our experience with unexamined biases. To reach the pure data of consciousness, Husserl proposed a radical step, the epoche, or bracketing. This involves suspending belief in the external existence of the world, not to deny it, but to refrain from using it as a premise. By neutralizing our validity claims, we are left with the phenomenon exactly as it presents itself. This reduction allows the philosopher to become a disinterested spectator of their own consciousness, revealing the essential structures of perception, memory, and imagination. It is a tool of liberation, freeing the mind from tradition and scientific abstraction to return to the things themselves. Life world, Lebenswelt. As modern science advanced, it increasingly described the world through mathematical formulas, creating a gap between scientific truth and everyday experience. Husserl warned that this idealized scientific world was being mistaken for the only true reality, while the rich, subjective world of daily life was dismissed. However, he argued that all scientific theories ultimately originate from the life world, the pre-scientific layer of immediate, lived experience. This world of perceived objects, culture, and practical engagement is the ground from which all theoretical knowledge grows. By recovering the dignity of this sphere, philosophy could heal the rift between objective science and subjective living. It serves as a reminder that before we are scientists, we are human beings living in a world of meaning, the forgotten foundation of all objective claims. Husserl's phenomenology provided the methodology for much of continental philosophy. His most famous student, Martin Heidegger, transformed Husserl's study of consciousness into an analysis of being. French existentialists like Sartre and Merleau-Ponty adapted his concepts of intentionality and the body to explore freedom and perception. His influence extends into sociology through Alfred Schutz and into cognitive science, where his analyses of time consciousness remain relevant. By demanding a return to the direct description of experience, Husserl permanently altered the landscape of Western philosophy, establishing a tradition that continues to challenge reductionism. Martin Heidegger. What does it mean to be, and how do we exist authentically? Martin Heidegger, born in rural Germany in 1889, is one of the most profound and controversial philosophers of the 20th century. Initially pursuing a path toward the priesthood through theological studies, he eventually turned to philosophy, studying under Edmund Husserl before succeeding him at Freiburg. His magnum opus, Being in Time, 1927, shattered conventions with its radical question regarding the meaning of being. Heidegger's reputation remains shadowed by his membership in the Nazi Party and his rectorship during the early years of the regime, a political entanglement he never fully apologized for. Despite this, his later work on technology, art, and language opened entirely new avenues of thought. He spent much of his life in a simple ski hut in the Black Forest, believing that authentic thinking required a rootedness in the earth and a distance from the distractions of modern technological society. Dasein. Traditional philosophy defined humans as rational animals or subjects distinct from objects. Heidegger felt this failed to capture how we actually exist. He chose the term Dasein, literally being there, to indicate that we are not isolated subjects trapped inside our heads, but are always already situated in a specific context. Dasein is unique because its own being is an issue for it. Unlike a stone, a human cares about what it is and what it will become. We exist as a clearing or opening where the world can show up and have meaning. By focusing on this open-ended structure, Heidegger shifted the emphasis from what a human is, a definition, to how a human exists, a set of possibilities. It reorients inquiry toward the concrete activities of navigating a world that matters to us. Being in the world. We often imagine ourselves as subjects standing apart from a world of objects. Heidegger argued that this separation is a theoretical construction. Our primary state is one of complete immersion. We do not first exist and then enter a world. To exist is to be involved in a network of equipment, relationships, and contexts. When we use a tool, like a hammer, we do not stare at it as an object, it recedes into the flow of our activity as we focus on the task. This concept dissolves the split between mind and matter. It reveals that our primary access to reality is not theoretical knowledge but practical familiarity. We are woven into the fabric of our environment. The world is not a container we are in, but a network of meanings that we inhabit and project. Care, Sorg. If we strip away specific activities, what fundamental structure holds our existence together? Heidegger's answer is care. This is a structural unity that combines our relationship to the past, present, and future. We are always thrown into a situation we did not choose, the past, yet we are always projecting ourselves toward possibilities, the future, all while engaging with the things around us, the present. Care signifies that to exist is to be concerned. We are never truly indifferent. Even indifference is a mode of care, a way of turning away. This concept identifies the core of human existence as a temporal movement. We are not static substances but are always ahead of ourselves, defined by what we strive to be. It grounds our existence in time and concern, making care the very being of the human self. Heidegger's dismantling of Western metaphysics influenced almost every area of continental philosophy. His existential analysis was a primary inspiration for Sartre and the French existentialist movement. His later writings on technology and the turn profoundly impacted environmental philosophy and postmodern thinkers like Derrida. His student, Hans-Georg Gadamer, further developed his hermeneutics. Despite the stain of his politics, Heidegger's critique of modernity and his fundamental question of being remain unavoidable for anyone grappling with the nature of human dwelling in a technological age. Karl Jaspers. How do we transcend empirical existence to reach authenticity? Karl Jaspers, born in 1883 in Germany, began his career in medicine and psychiatry before turning to philosophy, a trajectory that deeply informed his view of the human condition. Unlike systematic philosophers, Jaspers approached philosophy as a form of communication and personal awakening. He was a close friend of Martin Heidegger until the rise of Nazism drove a wedge between them. Jaspers, whose wife was Jewish, was stripped of his teaching post and lived under constant threat until the war's end. This brush with totalitarianism solidified his commitment to political liberty and the importance of reason. His major work, Philosophy, explores the limits of scientific knowledge and the necessity of transcending objective facts to reach authentic existence. Jaspers preferred the term philosophy of reason, emphasizing that true philosophy is not a doctrine to be learned but an activity of inner transformation. Boundary situations, Grenzsituationen. In everyday life, we rely on routines and scientific knowledge to manage our environment. We operate with a sense of security, believing everything can be calculated. However, certain moments shatter this illusion: death, suffering, guilt, and struggle. These are boundary situations, inescapable realities that we cannot change or solve, we can only face them. When we collide with these walls, our ordinary ways of navigating the world fail. Yet, this collapse is a unique opportunity. It forces the individual to wake up and confront the ultimate questions of being. By acknowledging these limits, we are pushed to discover a deeper, more authentic self. These situations serve as a catalyst, transforming us from mere biological creatures into true existence, capable of freedom and profound communication. Existence. Most of the time, we exist as empirical beings, defined by traits and roles that can be categorized. Yet, Jaspers argued there is a dimension of the self that evades all objective classification: existence. This is the realm of freedom, decision, and authenticity. It is not a property we possess like height, it is a possibility we must actualize. One cannot know existence through science, one can only become it through decisive action. It is the self that chooses itself in the face of uncertainty. This distinguishes humans from all other objects. While objects simply are, humans exist in a mode of potentiality. To fail to achieve this is to remain merely Dasein in Jaspers' usage, meaning mere empirical existence, never fully becoming a true self. The encompassing. When we think, we focus on specific objects within a horizon. Science and logic divide the world into subjects and objects. However, Jaspers noted that this split always leaves something out: the background that holds everything together. We can never step outside reality to view it as a whole because we are always within it. This all-embracing horizon, neither subject nor object, but the ground of both, is termed the encompassing. Recognizing this limit prevents the arrogance of claiming absolute knowledge. It reminds us that our scientific grasp of the world is always partial and that the ultimate mystery of being always recedes as we approach it. This idea preserves a sense of wonder, suggesting that truth is not a fixed destination but a ceaseless movement within a reality that always exceeds our concepts. Jaspers was a central figure in post-war German intellectual reconstruction. His concept of the axial age influenced religious studies and sociology, proposing a pivotal period where world civilizations simultaneously developed philosophical foundations. His writings on the atom bomb were early contributions to the philosophy of global politics. While his fame was somewhat eclipsed by Heidegger's radical ontology, Jaspers' emphasis on communication, political freedom, and the limits of science remains vital. His work continues to resonate in psychiatry, particularly in the phenomenological approach to mental illness, and in debates regarding the relationship between science, faith, and human freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre. If we are condemned to be free, how should we live? Jean-Paul Sartre, born in Paris in 1905, was the defining public intellectual of the 20th century and the face of French existentialism. A novelist, playwright, and philosopher, he possessed a prodigious talent and a hunger for engagement. His partnership with Simone de Beauvoir formed one of history's most famous intellectual couples. Sartre's wartime experience as a meteorologist, a prisoner of war, and a member of the resistance sharpened his focus on freedom and commitment. His seminal work, Being in Nothingness, outlines a radical philosophy of freedom, while his later works attempted to synthesize existentialism with Marxism. He famously refused the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1964, insisting that a writer should not be turned into an institution. Even in declining health, he remained a vocal activist until his death in 1980, followed by a funeral attended by thousands in Paris. Existence precedes essence. For centuries, the dominant view was that humans are created according to a specific design, that there is a pre-existing human nature or essence. Sartre famously reversed this. In a world without a divine creator, there is no blueprint. We first appear on the scene, we exist, and only afterwards do we define ourselves. There is no human nature to blame or rely upon, we are simply what we make of ourselves. This reversal places the entire weight of responsibility on the individual. If there is no predetermined script, every action we take constitutes our identity. We are condemned to be free, forced to invent our own values in a universe that offers none. This concept strips away all excuses, asserting that our choices are the only brushstrokes that paint the portrait of our lives. Bad faith. Facing absolute freedom is terrifying. It generates anguish because it means we are responsible for the value of the world itself. To escape this, we often lie to ourselves, a state Sartre calls bad faith. We pretend we are not free, claiming our choices are determined by our past, our society, or our personality. This is the act of treating oneself as an object, like a waiter who acts like a waiter robot to avoid his own agency. In bad faith, we deny our transcendence, our ability to change, and hide behind our facticity, our concrete situation. It is a flight from the truth of our condition. Authenticity requires recognizing this mechanism and confronting the dizzying reality that, at any moment, we can choose to be otherwise. Radical freedom. We usually think of freedom as the ability to do what we want, limited by obstacles. Sartre's view goes deeper. Freedom is the very texture of consciousness. Because consciousness is a nothingness, a lack of fixed being, it is never fully determined by the material world. We are always separated from our situation by our ability to negate it and imagine it otherwise. Even a prisoner is free, not necessarily to escape physically, but to decide the meaning of their imprisonment, to despair, to resist, or to accept. This freedom is absolute and inescapable. We are freedom. This means that in every situation, there is always a choice of attitude. This terrified optimism asserts that we are the undisputed authors of our own lives, with no excuses to lean on. Sartre's existentialism defined the post-war mood, influencing a generation of writers and activists. His focus on political responsibility set the model for the committed intellectual. While later movements like structuralism attacked his philosophy of the subject, his analyses of the gaze and the body remain foundational in social theory. His plays, such as No Exit, introduced existential themes to a massive audience, famously embedding the idea that hell is other people into culture. Post-colonial thinkers like Frantz Fanon drew heavily on Sartre's work to critique colonialism. Despite the decline of his specific politics, Sartre's rigorous defense of human agency remains a touchstone for discussions on responsibility. Simone de Beauvoir. How can marginalized groups achieve freedom and agency? Simone de Beauvoir, born in Paris in 1908, was a philosopher, novelist, and essayist whose work laid the foundations for modern feminism. Raised in a bourgeois Catholic family, she lost her faith as a teenager and dedicated her life to intellectual pursuit. At the Sorbonne, she became the youngest person ever to pass the rigorous aggregation in philosophy. While her lifelong partnership with Sartre is famous, Beauvoir was a formidable independent thinker. Her novels won prestigious awards, but it was her massive treatise, The Second Sex, 1949, that revolutionized the understanding of gender. Beauvoir lived her philosophy, refusing marriage and motherhood to maintain her autonomy. Her work consistently bridges the gap between abstract concepts and the concrete realities of lived experience, particularly the experience of women in a male-dominated world. The other. In consciousness, the subject defines itself by distinguishing itself from objects. To say I is to posit a not I. Beauvoir argued that, historically, this duality was applied to gender. Man is defined as the subject, the absolute, the standard of humanity. Woman, in contrast, is defined relative to man. She is the other, the inessential as opposed to the essential. This marginalization is not merely a social inequality but an ontological degradation, trapping women in roles where they are viewed as objects to be acted upon rather than subjects who act. By identifying this structure, Beauvoir revealed how dominant groups maintain power by casting marginalized groups as a deviation from the norm. This concept became a critical tool for analyzing oppression across many contexts. Immanence versus transcendence. Beauvoir saw human existence as a conflict between two drives. Transcendence is the active, creative movement of the self into the future, engaging in projects and shaping the world. It is the hallmark of freedom, yet historically it was a domain reserved for men. Immanence, by contrast, is a state of stagnation and repetition, where one is treated as a mere biological organism. Historically, women were confined to immanence, trapped in domestic cycles and denied the projects that define human value. This confinement was often disguised as nature or destiny. Beauvoir argued that a life restricted to immanence is a mutilated life. The struggle for liberation is thus the struggle for the right to transcendence, the right to be an active agent in history. Becoming a woman. Biological facts are often used to justify social roles, suggesting anatomy is destiny. Beauvoir radically challenged this with her famous declaration, "One is not born, but rather becomes, a woman." This shifts the focus from biology to socialization. While a female is born with specific traits, woman is a social construct, a product of upbringing and societal expectations. From childhood, girls are often taught to be passive and to please, while boys are encouraged toward independence. This process of becoming is an external imposition that limits freedom. By exposing gender as a constructed identity rather than an innate essence, Beauvoir opened the door for women to reject these scripts, implying that if woman is something made, it can also be unmade and remade. The Second Sex is the canonical text of second-wave feminism. Beauvoir's analysis of gender as a social construct anticipated modern gender theory and the work of Judith Butler. By applying existentialist ethics to the situation of women, she transformed the discussion of rights into a profound philosophical inquiry. Her memoirs provide a detailed history of 20th-century intellectual life, and her later work on the treatment of the elderly, the coming of age, broke new ground in social philosophy. She remains a symbol of intellectual independence, proving that philosophy is a tool not just for understanding the world, but for changing it. Albert Camus. How do we live meaningfully in an indifferent universe? Albert Camus, born in French Algeria in 1913, grew up in extreme poverty, raised by a widowed, illiterate mother. This humble background, coupled with the beauty of the Mediterranean, deeply flavored his thought. A talented goalkeeper and theater enthusiast, his life was altered by tuberculosis, which ended his academic career and sharpened his awareness of mortality. He became a journalist and a resistance fighter during World War II, editing the underground newspaper Combat. Though often linked with Sartre, Camus rejected the existentialist label, preferring to focus on the immediate experience of the absurd. His novels like The Stranger and essays like The Myth of Sisyphus won worldwide acclaim, culminating in the Nobel Prize in 1957. He was a moralist who championed individual integrity over ideology, leading to a bitter fallout with the French left. He died tragically young in a car accident in 1960. The absurd. Humans have an innate drive to find meaning and order in the world. We ask why and expect a reasonable answer. The universe, however, offers only a resounding silence. It is indifferent and unintelligible to our categories. The absurd is neither the world itself nor the human mind, it is the divorce or confrontation between this longing for clarity and the unreasonable silence of the world. Recognizing this condition is the first step of a lucid consciousness. Most people try to escape this truth through philosophical suicide, leaping into faith or ideologies that promise a false sense of order. To live honestly, Camus argues, is to acknowledge this fracture without trying to resolve it, maintaining the tension of the absurd as a source of integrity. Revolt. Faced with the absurd, the temptation is to succumb to despair or nihilism. However, the proper response is not surrender, but defiance. Revolt is the refusal to accept the absurdity of existence and the injustice of the world, even while knowing they cannot be ultimately defeated. It is a constant confrontation, a no said to a world that crushes the individual. Unlike revolution, which often sacrifices the present for a future utopia, revolt is a defense of the dignity of the present moment and shared human value. It asserts that life is worth living precisely because we rebel against its meaninglessness. This creates a solidarity. In revolting against our common fate, we realize that I rebel, therefore we are. It is a reaffirmation of human limits. The stranger, absurd hero. In a society governed by conventions and expected emotional responses, the individual who refuses to play the game becomes an outsider. This is illustrated by the character who does not cry at his mother's funeral simply because he does not feel the need to perform an emotion he does not possess. This honesty makes him a monster in the eyes of society, which views his indifference as a threat. This character represents the nakedness of man before the absurd, stripped of illusions, refusing to lie to himself. He lives fully in the sensory present, indifferent to abstract values. His condemnation reveals the hypocrisy of a world that demands conformity over truth. By accepting his fate without regret, he achieves a strange form of happiness, embracing the benign indifference of the universe. Camus' exploration of the absurd resonated deeply with a world shaken by world wars and nuclear threat. His refusal to justify political violence for ideology made him a controversial figure but established him as a prescient voice against totalitarianism. His literary style, characterized by clarity and restraint, influenced minimalism and the Nouveau Roman. The Stranger remains one of the most widely read novels in the world, a rite of passage for students grappling with alienation. His thought continues to inspire those seeking a secular humanism that acknowledges the tragedy of existence without giving in to despair, standing as a defender of moderation and the beauty of life. Michel Henry. How does life experience its own pathos from within? Michel Henry, born in French Indochina in 1922, was a unique voice in phenomenology, developing a philosophy that diverged sharply from the trends of his time. He lived a quiet life as a professor and novelist, serving in the French resistance during the war. While contemporaries like Sartre focused on the world and the outside, Henry turned his gaze radically inward. He sought to understand the essence of life not as a biological object, but as a subjective experience. His major works, such as The Essence of Manifestation, are rigorous and demanding, challenging the entire Western tradition. He argued that philosophy had forgotten the most basic reality, the immediate feeling of being alive. Henry was also a profound interpreter of Christianity and art, seeing them as expressions of this inner life. He died in 2002, leaving a legacy increasingly recognized for its spiritual depth and radical originality. Radical immanence. Western philosophy has traditionally understood manifestation as something appearing at a distance, like seeing an object in light. This implies a separation between the seer and the seen. However, Henry argued there is a more fundamental mode of revelation, the way life reveals itself to itself. This is radical immanence. In this state, there is no distance and no outside. Life does not look at itself, it feels itself. It is a crushing intimacy where the self is identical with itself. This experience is invisible to the eyes of the world because it never steps out into the light of the exterior, it is the silent foundation of our being. By recovering this concept, the focus shifts from the visible world of objects to the pathos of living, the immediate, non-representational self-experience. Life as auto-affection. When we speak of life, we usually think of biological processes, cells dividing or hearts beating. This is life viewed from the outside, as an object of science. But Henry argued this is not what it means to be alive. To be alive is to undergo the experience of oneself. This mechanism is termed autoaffection, the process by which life affects itself, feeling its own weight and content. This self-feeling is the defining characteristic of subjectivity. A rock exists, but it does not feel itself existing. Autoaffection manifests as the twin poles of suffering and joy, because life is passive and cannot escape itself, it suffers its own being, yet, as the source of its own power, it experiences the joy of self-possession. This definition reclaims life from biology, positioning it as the absolute subjective reality. Flesh. We typically identify our body with the visible object in the mirror, the objective body. However, Henry distinguishes this from the body we live. The flesh is the subjective body, the body that feels pain, effort, and movement from the inside. When we move our hand, we do not observe it like a tool, we inhabit the movement immediately. The flesh is the site of our radical immanence, where we are identical with our sensations. It is not an object in the world but the very medium of our existence. This distinction is crucial for critiquing modern culture, which tends to reduce the body to a material object to be improved or displayed. By returning to the concept of flesh, Henry restores the sanctity of the feeling individual against the dehumanizing tendency to view humans as mere biological machines. Michel Henry's radical phenomenology has gained significant traction, influencing the theological turn in French philosophy. His work offers a powerful alternative to deconstructionism, and his analysis of affect has influenced contemporary research in psychology and theories of the embodied mind. His critique of Marxism as a betrayal of the living individual remains potent. Furthermore, his writings on the nature of art provide a unique theory that prioritizes emotional resonance over representation. Henry stands as an essential guardian of the inner life, reminding philosophy that before we see the world, we must first feel ourselves alive.